We are trapped, right now, in June of 2026. The most powerful military nation in the history of the world cannot figure out how to walk away from a conflict it had absolutely no business entering in the first place. The Persian Gulf has become America's Hotel California. We checked in loud, we checked in threatening, we checked in with every aircraft carrier and bomber wing we could float into that water, and now Donald Trump, with all of his bluster, all of his ultimatums, all of his declarations of total American military supremacy, cannot check out. That is not political commentary. That is the strategic reality that senior military professionals and intelligence insiders are now saying plainly and openly, even while the institutions around them scramble to suppress it. This is the Persian Gulf trap. This is what it actually looks like, and this is what they are not telling you. If this kind of journalism, the kind that doesn't beg for approval from the powerful, doesn't soften the truth to protect access, and doesn't treat you like a child who can't handle reality if that matters to you, then subscribe right now, leave a comment, share this video, because the conversation happening in Washington bears almost no relationship to the reality on the ground, and the gap between those two things is going to cost every single person watching this. Now let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about the trap itself, because understanding how we got here is the only way to understand what comes next. Donald Trump walked into this conflict without an exit strategy, without a coherent theory of victory, and without any serious reckoning with what he was actually up against. The threats were issued. The ultimatums were delivered. The declarations of American military dominance were broadcast across every available platform, and each one of those statements made the situation worse, not better, because each one raised the stakes of backing down without producing the capitulation that would justify them. Here is the thing that every military officer who has ever commanded troops in the field understands viscerally, and that apparently nobody in the civilian leadership of this country bothered to absorb before committing to this path. Military power has limits, hard, non-negotiable, physics-level limits. You can accomplish certain things with the force available to you, and there are things that force simply cannot accomplish, no matter how much of it you apply. The fantasy that sustained bombing campaigns and missile strikes can bend the will of a nation of 90 million people, a civilization with thousands of years of continuous history, a government that has spent 47 years building its entire identity around resistance to exactly this kind of external pressure. That fantasy is what produced the trap, and now the trap is sealed. Consider the four walls. Wall 1. Trump cannot simply walk away. He has staked too much of his political identity on this, made too many declarations that are now part of the public record, framed this conflict too explicitly as a test of American power and will, leaving without a clear and demonstrable American victory would look to his base and to his opponents alike like surrender. His brand cannot survive that. Wall 2. He does not have the military means to achieve what he said he would achieve. Despite the weeks of sustained operations, the strategic initiative has shifted. Tehran, not Washington, is now dictating the pace and terms of this conflict. That is the operational reality. Wall 3. There is no credible evidence that returning to even more intense military strikes will produce a different outcome. The Iranian government has not shown a single indication that it is prepared to capitulate to external military force. And wall for the one that hits closest to home for ordinary Americans. There is no amount of pain the United States can inflict on Iran that will not rebound catastrophically on the global economy, on supply chains, on energy prices, on inflation. We are not just looking at supply chain disruption, we are looking at supply chain destruction. The exit is still barely visible. Military strategists will tell you this privately. The move is to declare a humanitarian suspension of operations, to tell the world that the damage being inflicted on global commerce and civilian populations is too severe, that diplomacy must take over. Would that be politically painful? Yes. Would it look like retreat to certain audiences? Probably, but here is the brutal calculus. 64% of Americans currently oppose this war. Most of them are not following the day-to-day developments closely. The moment gas hits $10 a gallon, and we're at $5 right now, that changes overnight. The moment body bags start arriving at scale, that changes overnight. The window for a managed, face-saving exit is still open. It will not remain open, and the man in the Oval Office appears constitutionally incapable of walking through it. Now here is where the official story does not just fall short, it actively deceives the American public, and the people constructing that deception know exactly what they are doing. For months, the narrative fed to Americans through official briefings, through compliant coverage, through presidential declarations, has been this: we hammered Iran's military infrastructure, we degraded their capabilities, we set them back years, Iran is weakened, Iran is on the back foot. The threat is being managed and contained. That story is a fabrication. It is not supported by the intelligence community's own assessments, and we know this because someone inside that community decided the American people deserved the truth. The CIA leaked its assessment to the New York Times, and the assessment is this: more than 90% of Iran's military capability remains intact, not 40%, not half, 90%. Their missile-launching infrastructure is operational. Their unmanned aerial systems are operational. The entire network that links space-based satellite assets to weapons systems on the ground providing real-time targeting data, instantaneous kill chains, all of it is still functioning. Iran is not running out of missiles. Iran is not running out of launchers. The first phase of this war ended with Iran's military standing at 90% of its pre-war capability. The President of the United States has been telling you something categorically different. Now you know why that matters. But the picture gets considerably darker, because during the operational pause between the first phase and whatever comes next, Iran has not been standing still, holding its breath and hoping for a diplomatic reprieve. Russia has provided substantial upgrades to Iran's radar and electronic warfare systems. China, and this is the part that the American foreign policy establishment does not want to say out loud, has delivered new cruise missiles and new ballistic missiles to Iran, specifically engineered to do one thing: locate and destroy United States Navy surface combatants. These are near hypersonic platforms. They have a range of 300 to 400 kilometers. They are pre-positioned in hardened underground facilities carved into the mountainous coastline of southern Iran. They are operated and maintained not solely by Iranian personnel. There are Chinese technicians on the ground. There are Russian technicians on the ground. These weapons are positioned, targeted, and ready, and they are designed specifically to sink the ships carrying American sailors. Before anyone in Washington works up the theatrical outrage to call this an act of aggression, let them answer one honest question. What has the United States been doing in Ukraine for the past several years? We have been supplying weapons systems, providing training, embedding advisors, sharing battlefield intelligence, and directly enabling military operations against Russian forces. The symmetry is exact. What Russia and China are doing in Iran is the mirror image of what we have been doing in Ukraine. The response of calling it outrageous reveals not a principled position but an expectation that the rules apply to everyone except us. And that expectation, more than any single policy decision, is what has isolated American power on the world stage. The geography alone makes decisive military victory through air power a fantasy. Iran is the geographic size of Western Europe. The northern, eastern, and western borders are protected by mountain ranges that match the Rockies in scale and impassability. The southern approaches run into some of the most inhospitable desert terrain on Earth, dispersed across that geography, hardened into mountains, hidden in tunnel networks built over decades specifically for this contingency. Iran's military forces are not vulnerable to the kind of sustained air campaign that demolished Iraqi conventional forces in open desert in 1991. This is not the same war, and pretending otherwise is how you end up with 90% of the adversary's military intact after weeks of your most intensive operations. If you've been getting your news from mainstream sources and none of this matches the picture you've been given, that is not an accident. And if you want to understand why this matters so urgently to your daily life, your bank account, your grocery bills, your kids' future, then stay right here, because what comes next is the economic reality that ties all of this together. Before we get into that, I need you to do something. If this channel is giving you information that the televised news won't touch, then subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Drop a comment below telling me where you think this is headed. This kind of work only continues if the audience makes it possible, and the audience for truth-based journalism needs to be larger than the audience for comfortable lies. Subscribe, share, now. Let's talk about what happened in China, because the Trump administration is spinning the summit as a victory, and that framing deserves to be completely dismantled. Xi Jinping did something remarkable at that meeting. He used the formal architecture of a bilateral summit between the leaders of the world's two largest economies to deliver, politely and diplomatically, a message of profound strategic clarity. China is ascending, America is declining. If the United States seeks Chinese cooperation on any significant matter, including Iran, the price of that cooperation is fundamental change, not in tone, not in tariff schedules, but in the structural way America conducts itself at home and abroad. That was the substance of what she communicated. The diplomatic courtesies were the wrapping, the message was the contents. On Iran specifically, the answer was no, not a conditional no, not a diplomatic deferral, but a structural no rooted in a calculation that Russia and China made some time ago. If Iran is successfully defeated and subjugated by American military power, the precedent established points directly at them as the next candidates for that treatment. From their perspective, Iranian resistance is not just a regional conflict, it is a demonstration effect for the entire world about whether American military coercion can be successfully resisted. They have every incentive in the world to ensure the answer to that question is yes, it can, and so the delegation flew to Beijing. The technology executives took their seats at the table, the meetings happened, the photographs were taken, and everyone flew home with nothing that changed the strategic equation by a single degree. And then Vladimir Putin arrived in Beijing days later, which completed the picture with crystalline clarity. The Russia-China relationship is not an ideological alliance or a partnership of deep mutual affection. It is a symbiotic relationship of necessity and mutual interest. Russia possesses the energy resources, the minerals, the agricultural capacity, and the geographic buffer that China requires for long-term strategic security. China possesses the manufacturing base, the technological development capacity, and the economic scale that Russia needs to sustain itself against Western pressure. They need each other, and what they share above all right now is an interest in a world where American unilateral dominance is a historical phenomenon rather than a present reality. Now, the economic dimension of all this, these numbers are not abstractions. They are the lived reality that ordinary Americans are either experiencing right now or are about to experience with brutal force. WTI crude oil has blown through $100 a barrel and is holding there, and that is not the ceiling, that is the floor. The assessment from serious energy market analysts looking at the trajectory of this conflict is that $200 a barrel is achievable before the end of this year if the next phase of military operations unfolds as expected. $200 oil means gasoline prices that the American economy has never encountered. It means every trucked product, every shipped commodity, every manufactured item gets repriced upward. It means the effective purchasing power of every American worker is quietly and relentlessly destroyed. Layered on top of that energy shock is the inflation picture that should terrify every household in this country. We could be looking at 10, 12, 15% inflation over the next several years. The national debt to GDP ratio is already above 125%, more than 3 times what it was during the stagflation crisis of the 1970s. Bond markets across the world are under sustained pressure. Yields are rising. When the 10-year Treasury yield crosses 5%, the interest payments on that accumulated debt become structurally impossible to manage without either printing money, cutting essential services, or both. These mechanisms are not theoretical, they are operational. The military catastrophe in the Persian Gulf and the economic catastrophe building in financial markets are not two separate problems. They are the same problem expressing itself in two different registers simultaneously. Now let's turn to the war that dropped off the front page but did not stop happening, Ukraine and Russia. The narrative for the past few years has been one of heroic Ukrainian resistance, Russian stagnation, and an eventual negotiated outcome that preserves Ukrainian sovereignty. That narrative has been undercut by events on the ground. And the endgame that appears to be forming is one that Western media establishments are deeply reluctant to describe honestly. The military balance has shifted comprehensively. Russia has transformed itself through this conflict from a force designed for border defense into something considerably more capable of large-scale offensive operations. The production lines are running, the manpower pipeline is functioning, the tactical and operational doctrine has been updated through the hardest school available, actual combat against a motivated adversary receiving Western weapons and training. The force that exists today is categorically different from the one that crossed the border in early 2022. The positional setup now visible on the ground points toward a massive coordinated operation. Between 20 and 30,000 North Korean troops are positioned in Belarus, north of Kyiv, alongside Russian and Belarusian forces already staged there. The tactical geometry of that configuration has one obvious interpretation: a pincer movement, a simultaneous drive from the north through Belarus toward Kyiv combined with a crossing from Ukrainian territory to the east of the capital. At the same time, substantial Russian forces estimates run between 150,000 and 200,000 troops are positioned for operations at Zaporizhia on the Dnipro River, with Odessa as the clear strategic objective in the south. Odessa is not a random target. Odessa has been a Russian-speaking, Russian-identified city since it was incorporated under the Tsars around 1776. It has been part of the Russian cultural and historical sphere for longer than the United States has existed as a nation, and there are specific historical grievances surrounding Odessa that Russian military and political leadership have not forgotten and do not intend to leave unaddressed. If Odessa falls, Ukraine loses its Black Sea coastline. It becomes a landlocked state with no maritime outlet, geographically and economically reduced to something far smaller than what the modern Ukrainian state has been. Whether that entity is viable as a functioning independent country is the open question that Europe will have to answer in whatever comes after. And Europe's answer to that question may be shaped decisively by Germany, which is the most underreported story in international relations right now. Without Germany, the European Union has no economic meaning. Germany is the engine, and Germany is changing in ways that will reorder the continent. The new German government is signaling clearly that unconditional support for the current Ukrainian leadership is ending, driven in part by a growing body of evidence that enormous quantities of Western aid have been systematically redirected, resold on black markets, and deposited in offshore accounts by precisely the people who were supposed to be defending the nation. If this video gave you something real, something the cable networks won't say, something the political consultants don't want you to hear, then do something with it. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you think this is all headed. Because your read on this matters as much as any analyst in Washington. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The political class stopped listening to ordinary Americans a long time ago. That changes when ordinary Americans refuse to stop paying attention. Subscribe, share, stay informed, because the next few months are going to change everything.